Welcome to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds and under 30 of your opponent's objectives bricked beyond redemption. I'm your host, Davey, and with me, as always, my other host, Phil. How are you doing, Phil?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Pretty tired,
All right.
but I'm hanging in there.
We're going to power through.
Yeah.
We got our topic today is control play, and for that, we brought in somebody who created a very cool article about that kind of got us excited about this. We got Matt from Set the Tempo. How are you doing, Matt?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're good. Thanks for coming on. We're excited to have you. We've been big fans of your blog, as is probably evidenced by the number of times that we end up mentioning community shout-outs. I think we would have mentioned it more, but it was like, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse. I got to kind of spread it around. So
I really appreciate that. That's awesome. I'm glad you guys are liking it. And no, big thanks. Love the show. So really happy to be on today. Yeah,
great. This is actually not the first time that we've covered control play. I am going to get this wrong. I think it might have been episode 18, maybe. We had Mike Carlin on back in the... It's kind of... Yeah, it's almost 40 episodes almost ago. Not quite that many, but wow. Anyway, a few things have changed since then, but...
few.
We're going to cover that. But before we do, we're going to go... we're going to talk a little bit to Matt first, and we're going to do some of our usual things. So, Matt... you've been running Set the Tempo, that blog. How long has that been going on for now?
It's been going on for about 9 months now. Okay.
And what made you say, like, hey, I need to blog this? What's your Underworlds background? What fires you up about Underworlds that made you say, like, I want to be a content creator for this and I want to get in on this?
Well, I'll start from the point of my wife wanted me to talk at her less about Underworlds and the ins and outs of the strategy. Like, you know how, like, my wife likes the game, my wife plays the game, but she's not nearly as interested in it as I am.
Sure.
So it's that point where you've gone 300% down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I'm fine here at the entrance.
Yeah. She's like, Matt, can you find a friend or something? So
yeah. So that was one of the major things, but Underworlds wise, I started actually. The story kind of starts, with my wife, and we're big board gamers. I think on your last episode you were talking about kind of other tabletop games and other entries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she was getting into miniature painting, and so we would go to the GW store, every time we're in the mall and mm-hmm. look at the beautiful models and go, we're not going to spend that much money on models we're not going to play with.
Yeah.
And I remember Shadespire coming out and going like, yeah, that's nice. She doesn't like Khorne. She's not into those models. I love Stormcast. So, and then Nightvault came out and I was like, oh, there's ghosts. Nighthaunt are pretty. And then they announced a Sylvaneth Warband, and I was able to convince her to let me get into the game.
Sealed the deal. All right. Nice.
Yeah.
That's trees, man.
Oh yeah. So from there, I was really just playing with her and a friend, kind of, casually, and we went to our first tournament, and then I was hooked just completely. Started getting to know the community here, and just went down that rabbit hole in the big way.
Well,
and good.
We're glad you did, because the blog's been awesome. I know you've gotten a lot of. I've seen other folks giving you feedback. I know you've gotten a lot of kudos for you've found some interesting ways to come at the game.
Thanks.
Find a way to talk about it that is not already being done by other folks, and that's pretty awesome.
And I think like it'll lead into what we're going to talk about today. But a major reason I wanted to start the blog was to give us more vocabulary to talk about the game about. I think we were limited very into, you had your play styles, and that was kind of about all we talked about. Mm-hmm. And if you go to the blog, like if I'm reviewing cards or looking at things, I'm looking at how passive they are. I'm looking at how viable they are, and just trying to kind of build more elements on top of just, this is a control card. This is an aggro card.
Yeah, I mean, I
Definitely.
really like it for that. It was cool. And then the subject matter has branched out. You've been talking about some of those styles of play. You had Captain Murder on to talk about Flex even in there.
Yeah.
It was very very much in his own voice there. So that was awesome.
Very much so. And so Derek is actually a local player. So
Yeah,
he was one of the first people I met in the community. So he's probably the person I've played the most.
awesome. Well, you got strong competition there.
Yeah.
Well, that's your community. Let's take a spin on the community shout outs here. There's one I've been wanting to shout out for quite a bit. Although Phil, you got anything you want to ping before I do?
Oh, I wish.
Okay.
I've been busy with work lately, so I really in the last couple of weeks haven't really done anything in the hobby. Not reading, not playing, not like building models or anything. So, unfortunately, no, I've got nothing. So I will be
Just
checking in this list, putting together all of the things that I need to go check out here when
all
I've
right.
got some time.
So let's see. I've got for me it was the Gloryseekers. This is a blog that's being run by Jacko and Craig from Tabletop Sydney. They have done a number of articles, but what's been very cool lately is the Building on a Budget series. I talked to them about it. If they wanted me to highlight any particular one, they picked out the most recent at the time of this recording was Dread Pageant. These are pretty incredible. Like they're really well made. The blog's really well put together. They've got a thing where they got a card name. You hover over that and it'll pop the card up. So cool things like that. But really went into it's a really good follow on actually from our previous episode. If you're somebody who is new to our podcast, you've just come on because you got introduced to it. These guys, this is where you want to go, and we'll link to it in our show notes because it says like, if you're starting out, there's a lot to pick up. They say they assume you've got a starting point of the warband that you selected, and the essentials, and I think the Dreadfane starter or whatever, not Dreadfane, Dire Chasm.
Yeah.
And then they look like, all right, how can we get to a good spot with two more boxes? I thought it was a super cool way of doing it. They go card by card, like, we're going to maybe drop this for this. I mean, it's super detailed. I was very impressed. Really enjoyed reading through it. Haven't read them all, but they do a great job. So if you're somebody, because a lot of content out there is kind of geared towards the players who are fully in, have everything, I think this is a great piece of content that is aimed at folks who are not there yet, but want to get there. What about you, Matt? You got anything that you want to shout out?
Yeah, I got two pieces. The first one, I've actually been getting into the Age of Sigmar lore a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So funnily enough, I've been listening to Phil a lot lately because, I've been listening to the Mortal Realms podcast, The Story Phase, and catching up on all the Broken Realms lore. And those have been great. High recommendation from me. It's been a good jumping in point, kind of just starting with Broken Realms and kind of getting a kind of summary up to Age of Sigmar 3.
Nice.
Solid.
We'll talk a little bit more of that right at the end here. But what else do you got?
And then I really enjoyed the last episode of Critcast with John and Rob and the Right to Respond.
Mm-hmm.
I think counterplay is a large part of this game, and making sure that kind of design matches and balance matches that the effectiveness of counterplay. I'd say that's probably a core value for me in Underworlds, and so that was a really great take on it. So I really enjoyed that episode.
That's very cool. I haven't actually heard that one yet, so I'll throw that on the playlist and get to it. I had a scattering of smaller things. These are just community moments that popped out. One that actually David from your area listened to the last episode. He pointed out one thing he noticed with the starter set was that you flip the objectives and there was the Shadespire style where on the backside they just kind of have rubble. So those are objectives that flip and they don't flip to a lethal. Although I guess you could just count the rubble as lethal. But that comes from the starter set not making any mention of lethal hexes. That's something that players learn as they kind of expand out from that, I guess. So,
well, there could be even seasons where flipping is gone.
Sure.
I think flipping will be constant because of Kishitaka and Rothgorn.
Sure.
But they could take away the rule that it flips into a lethal. It might just flip into a blocked hex, which would be a very interesting.
Into a blocked. Ooh,
I like that.
Okay.
Right? Like imagine Star Bloods, but you can make your own Shard Falls with Kishitaka.
Whoa,
Shard Fall. What a cool. Yeah.
I wish that card was still around.
Me too.
Yeah. That was a fun one. Let's see what else. I'm going to give a shout out to, I guess I'm going to call them the Chosen Axes Mafia, because Tristan's been pinging me like saying, hey, like, what do you think of Chosen Axes? What do you think of this list? I heard you might be like checking them out. I was like, yeah, I'm kind of working a lot of different lists, but I always like them, and I got them painted up, and it'd be good to bust them out. And then finally this last in-person league night, I sent him a message like, hey, I'm finally going to do it. I'm going to bring them back out. And I went and played and had fun. And I came back and I had a message, and it was from someone else altogether. It was from Wathlab, who did that deployment guide. He was like, hey, I heard you might be trying Chosen Axes. I was like, what? I'm like, what?
How do you know?
How did you know? Like, so there's some kind of like Chosen Axes Mafia or whatever. So it's kind of a funny moment. And then the last one I want to say is I think it came up on the Underworld's private group on Facebook. Nick Baton had a post where with his, apparently he's trying to run a Reaver's deck that does Feed the Beastgrave, and he included Hold Objective 1 and scored it. It was just like I was like the number of like memes and gifs that like poured in after he like posted that was super entertaining.
Oh,
so
man,
shout out to him for leaning into that. So that's cool.
That's the mind games right there.
I know.
Dark horse for sure.
Yeah. The only thing better is if he had bricked his opponents, didn't even want it or something. That was not even in the game. But yeah. So that is that's it. We'll go to what the heck is going on with you, and then get onto this main topic. Phil, we know you've been on lockdown basically. So
yeah, basically.
I'll spare you the discomfort of having to do that. For me, I've been doing some Eyes of the Nine. I'm working on some conversions I'm pretty happy with. I took some Corvus Cabal bits to kind of lean into the bird theme.
Oh, nice.
Once I got them painted up. So they're Eyes of the Cabal or Eyes of the Gatherer. I haven't decided what the cute conversion name is, but we'll get there. And I've been playing some rippos for the WTC Nations Cup, and the boys have fed me some favorable matchups for Team England. So I'm right now I'm at 2-0 in my matchups. They've been real good,
nice.
Real fun. And both decks I like looked at. I'm like, I don't think I can beat this, and just kind of, and then you just hit on those single dice wolf bites, and then you do well. So that's how you get there.
As you know.
Yeah. That's Rippa for you. But Matt, what the heck has been going on with you?
Yeah, we've been able to get back to playing in person. So that's been really nice. I think there were 6 or 7 of us out last week,
nice.
Which was really nice. It was kind of like the first major day we've had, and so it was really great to see such a great turnout. I know Dave Beardarm was down from where he lives, about 3 hours away. So
wow.
And we hung out afterwards, and it was too late, and he was like, well, I got to make the 3-hour drive home now, because we just couldn't stop talking about Underworlds.
Yeah. I think I heard about your get together from him, because I think I played him online shortly after he was kicking me in the teeth with his worm spat. I was mentioning that we're kind of talking to you for an episode. He's like, oh, I just saw Matt, and I was like, oh, all right, cool,
awesome.
So yeah.
Yeah, we were. I was playing. We had a really interesting match that ended up exactly tied with Wormsmat and Dread Pageant.
All right, cool.
So that's been a lot of fun. And then other than that, I've been painting a ton of Stormcast because Dominion came out, and it finally was a gateway into Age of Sigmar for me.
There you go. What's your storm host?
So it's the Lions of Sigmar, which is a purple and gold.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
All right.
So I've pretty much painted. It's kind of like a darker, like a deeper purple, like a royal purple.
Yeah, but not as dark as the.
No.
Oh man.
Celestial Warbringers? No, I'm thinking of someone else.
Yeah.
So that's some Vindicators.
Astral Templars.
Oh, you got it. You found it. Oh, I know we have you on the lore episodes for a reason. So.
I've been painting my Stormcast the same way, since I got my first Stormcast model. So I've kind of worked on that color scheme across like every Underworld's warband, and when Storm of Celestis came out, I was like, I already got those painted. Like, they're done.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Cool. That's a fun twist. I have Knights Excelsior is the way I go, the all white.
Nice.
And I did that specifically because I hadn't painted that much white before. So, it's a great thing with Underworlds is you can be like, all right, I just have these 3 Steelhearts dudes. Let me see if I can do this. Actually, I guess I started with the
Farstriders,
but same point.
Yeah.
So, but let's get into it. Let's get into the episode overview here. So our main topic is control play, and the broad strokes of how we're going to talk about this are we're going to attempt to define it, and that's actually trickier than you might think, and we may not all agree on it, and that's going to be part of it. We're going to talk about some iconic cards and warbands for control, and we'll talk about the kind of state of it in the current meta. So, what I'm starting it out with here is to define it. We're going to try and give it a 1-sentence definition. Now, I'm going to throw mine out at you, and then you guys can make an attempt, or you can just jump straight to tell me why I'm wrong. But for the control play style in and of itself, I'd say for me, it's a play style that prioritizes finding a way to deny your opponent's scoring, while at the same time, keeping your own scoring reliable. And that is, I guess, how I tend to think of it. Anyone else want to take a stab at the 1-sentence definition here?
Yeah, I would say that it's a play style that tries to limit as many variables as possible, both yours and your opponent's, which I think is basically the same thing you're saying. Is it's like you're trying to both deny and guarantee. So denying your opponent and guaranteeing yourself, and trying to keep everything from being too random.
Okay, I like that.
I like that too. I think when I defined it in my article, I defined it very similar to the way Davey has, which is attempting to disrupt your opponent's game plan and score glory from those plays. Making sure your opponent can't do what they are wanting to do, and capitalizing on that.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yep. I think, unsurprisingly, the guy who wrote a blog post on it has the most eloquent description. You actually posed an interesting question, and this is actually not a bad time for it. Where is everyone? Here's the question: is everyone actually playing control all the time? Because the state of play is you are trying to score more than your opponent, which is I'm trying to disrupt my opponent. What's your take on that, Matt?
So I think in a large way, there's kind of 2 styles when people kind of sit down at the table. Like you're either I have my game plan, I'm going to execute that game plan, and nothing's really going to stop in my way. Aggro is very much like that. Yeah. There's a lot of objective decks where they're very much like that. However, both of those decks are going to play control in their own way during that game. So if you've got, an aggro, if you've got, Crimson Court aggro into Starblitz Stalkers, let's say.
Okay.
The Starblitz Stalkers are going to want to sit on the objectives, and that's their game plan, and that's how they're going to score glory. And the Crimson Court is going to try to get into their territory, score glory, and make kills. But what they're doing is trying to make the best charges which will involve disrupting the opponent's objectives.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the real question, we'll get to cards in a bit, but like, how is making the important charge onto the right fighter different than playing distraction on that fighter, other than the chance to miss?
Sure.
You know, you're still taking it in your hands to make a play to control the state of the board. It doesn't matter if I hit as long as I knock Huachi off this token.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a form of control in my mind, because what you're trying to do is control the board state.
Mm-hmm.
And vice versa. You know, if Kishitaka's on an objective and you play Buried Instinct, you've now set the odds against your opponent, prevented them from doing what they wanted to do, which is kill you or knock you off the objective. Mm-hmm. And you're going to score glory or inspire off of that. Mm-hmm. And once again, that's a form of control.
Sure. So we think, you know, everybody's doing, or everybody's almost always doing some form of control, particularly if they're thinking about things a little harder. Anytime you're actively thinking about what is my opponent trying to do, how can I stop it, that is a form of control. That's what we're saying here. If we're saying it as a play style, it's where you're prioritizing those sort of thought loops, those thought cycles of like you said in your blog. I'm more actively attempting to do that and scoring because I'm trying to do that, rather than I'm trying to do that but also score with, you know, what you know, the other things I'm supposed to be doing. I can say, for example, with the Ripa's deck I've been playing, it's unsurprisingly pretty aggro, more aggro than I usually build anything. It's getting into enemy territory a whole bunch and hanging out there. Nothing unique for Ripas. There's a lot of people who play it that way. And I was playing against a Skaven set to tempo deck, and I knew in my head, you know, because this is actually a tournament that plays with open lists, so we both know each other's lists coming into it. So I'm looking at it and I say, okay, you know, this player only has a couple of duels. If I can brick Bold Conquest or Swift Capture or both, then I can really deny set to tempo. And what I discovered is I just didn't have enough control to do that.
Yeah.
And so I was like, even though I wanted to, I just didn't have the resources to do that. And so I had to kind of let myself accept the fact that I wasn't going to disrupt it. I was going to make him spend more resources in order to do that, more resources than he would if I wasn't trying at all. And then otherwise have him spend those and then just trying to beat him on the foot race to the finish line as far as score more of mine than his. Other decks would have a lot more tools for that and could deny him outright, possibly, with a more control oriented deck than what I was bringing. But in that sense, I was not a control deck, but I was still, you know, taking those control actions, I guess.
Well, and like another good example of this, I think, is how the playstyle of the Thorns of the Briar Queen changed between Night Vault and Beastgrave.
Okay.
I think a lot of players would have had the Chain Rasps up front in the Night Vault season. And that was kind of standard. You know, just Chain Rasps up front, you kind of use them as your chaff, and you bring in, you know, the hammer and the anvil of, you know, Varklav and the Queen. But what we saw in the Beastgrave season especially is that there came a shift where the Chain Rasp started to be deployed at the back. And, you know, you had the Everhanged and Varklav and the Queen up front, as close as you could to the opponent, to try to deny the early kills. Like, that's a form of control just by the way you're deploying, because you're changing the targets of the fighters, making some of them potentially unreachable, which is controlling that board state. And you're, you know, anytime you can get your opponent to make a suboptimal play or give them a choice between two bad options, like, that's counterplay, that's control. And I think we don't talk about it enough in that sense. We talk about it as this overarching type and that has had some negative connotations in the past, which, you know, I don't necessarily think are warranted.
True.
Yeah.
Where do you think those negative connotations are really, like, you know, I feel like they most took off with the Relic Steel Hearts, right? I think that was kind of like the first I don't know, first really dramatic example of I'm going to keep you from scoring, because at the time Shadespire was very aggro oriented, and they were a warband that could do this thing where they prevented aggro scoring and could score a lot while preventing that.
So I think that control is on a spectrum, and I think that's basically what we were just saying, is that like everyone can do some control regardless of how you build your deck. And so like control by itself isn't bad, but when people play hard control, people get upset because it tends to be a negative play experience, because hard control can be to the point where if you don't have the tools to stop it, you're guaranteed to lose. And like this can happen in Magic the Gathering too, and blue is the perfect example of hard control if you're familiar with Magic, because the whole identity of blue is to just stop you from doing things.
So when I was a Magic player, I was primarily a blue player.
All right.
I mean, blue is often very strong and very polarizing, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
But so I think where people start to not like it is that it's like you don't get to play the game, I guess. Because it's like, oh, I guess I'll move towards your turtle cast guys and you'll start racking up a bunch of glory, and it doesn't matter what I do because I can't get to you fast enough to stop you.
Yeah, I think that is true if you define play the game as like I'm going to make a bunch of charges and throw a bunch of attacks. If there's it was Jonathan from Path to Glory. He's frequently defined it as like, you know, solving the puzzle or whatever. And so I remember kind of enjoying trying. I think we had Aaron run that Relic Steel Hearts once or twice, and I was like, I think I've got a pretty good deck. I don't know if I can handle it. And I was enjoying the challenge of trying to solve that puzzle. And it's not to say that if you found it unpleasant that you were wrong, but it definitely takes a particular mindset to find the pleasure of playing into some of those hard control, or especially when they're passive, I guess. Because as we pointed out, control does not, by definition, equal passive.
Correct.
And that's been a big, thesis statement for me around control, is that I think control has a negative connotation because it lumps in with passive control, which, first of all, the Forsaken and Restricted lists have always gone out of their way to remove opportunities for passive play, whether that's scoring or the specific tool sets. But those negative experiences that some people may have had where, well, I really couldn't play this game, I wasn't specifically prepped for that, really have given, a bad taste in people's mouths about, well, you're going to sit at the back of the board and not move, and I can't get to you. I will say, and this is probably leaning ahead, like, I'm so glad that the state of control, is in a much more exciting place with Dire Chasm.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that back of the board Steel Hearts that's a bad introductory experience, I would say. If you were expecting things to do, because to play against it requires knowledge of it and understanding and having built your deck for it. And if you were expecting people to charge back and forth across neutral territory, it's a real head fake. But we'll get to that. We'll get to the state of where we think it's at. Are you guys up for talking some of the iconic control cards? And we'll bring up some of these cards and explain why we think they're iconic for that reason.
Sure,
let's do it.
Matt, why don't you give us a couple to start us out? Why like a card and why it epitomizes control play in particular.
So I'm going to start with an old card that's not in rotation right now, but Alone in the Darkness was one that is a really big control card to me. I think that every play style is positional. It's in its own way. With aggro, you have to know where to charge. With objectives, obviously, you care about being on tokens. And something like Alone in the Darkness, as much as, it kind of became too strong and ended up being restricted in that season.
And help us out when we bring up a card. Give a quick rundown of what it is. Some players have not been with the game long enough to have looked up, and they can always look them up. But
so Alone in the Darkness is scoring an end phase for 2 glory if no fighter is adjacent to any other fighter.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason that I would put this in the control bucket is you are trying to ensure that all the fighters stay separate. So you're moving intentionally your fighters around to make sure that they're not ending adjacent to each other or enemy fighters. You're also making sure that you have the pushes in hand so that, if the enemy charges you but isn't able to drive you back, you can still push away or push the enemy away, which is really important. And so it was all about controlling the engagement and making sure that you weren't having multiple people adjacent to each other, and then trying to find a way to kind of mess with your opponent's back line. Thinking about it now, I think it would be really hard against Kanan's Reapers.
That'd be a nightmare. Those guys just love to party together.
Or the Spine Fin.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Soul Raid players should be very familiar with that card because they have it, just with a different name.
Yeah.
That's very true.
I think their only caveat is they have to have a fighter on the board. But guess what? They've got Spine Fin, so they can always have a fighter on the board. So that's a great first example. And it is, talking about the puzzle, there was a card I'd love to play with and against is the like noticing, hey, I think my opponent's setting up Alone in the Darkness. Okay, like let me make it harder for them to score that. Let me see how I can go about my, whatever it is, Reaver game plan of doing a bunch of charging. Maybe I won't choose to drive you back because I think you're going to have to spend energy to do something about this, or like that. That was always fun for me, and that's kind of that idea of cracking the control puzzle.
I think in some ways, Unafraid is the new Alone in the Darkness.
Sure.
Because it's a bit more aggro, which goes with kind of Dire Chasm's themes and the way that the card set is built out. But it's the same thing. You're messing with the positioning, and you have to make sure that your positioning is 100% tight, or you will not be able to score it.
Yeah. It's one that you can coincidentally score, but most of the time you have to be really thinking about it. You have to, and it needs a plan from early on, and it needs a lot of contingencies. Like, okay, I'm gonna make this charge, but what if I accidentally kill this guy that I think I'm probably not gonna land this hit on? But like, whoops, stab it somehow, hit with his 2-sword attack and his 1 hammer wolf bite and kill this guy. Okay, well, what's the plan now? So, that's a good one. Phil, how about one for you?
Yeah. There's a lot. I guess I'm going to start with, so that's some positional stuff. And I think positioning is often important for control play. And I'm going to go to Duel of Wits, which lets you react to an opponent's ploy to draw 2 cards. And I think because control often relies so heavily on your deck and being able to guarantee that you can do what you need to do when you need to do it, or stop your opponent from doing what they need to do, that having availability of all of your cards is really important. I think draw tech ends up being a big part of playing control, especially if you're going harder into control. And so Duel of Wits is a really prevalent example right now. People are probably very aware of this already. But there have been a lot of really good draw cards that have been all over the place lately. And then, of course, we have To the End, which kind of goes along with this to allow you to even more capitalize on drawing cards, where you can actually score glory for drawing cards.
So it's interesting. I'm going to give actually 2 examples here. So we've talked about some positioning control, and I think the iconic one here is Distraction, which is did it arrive with Iron Jaws way back? So it's been in and then rotated out and then returned. It's had quote unquote clones like Nightmare in the Shadows, but as opposed to Sidestep, which is moving, we did our very first episode. I always say this was on pushes. So Distraction versus Sidestep. Distraction is the one that's targeted towards disrupting your opponent. more so than helping. Now they have a lot of overlap. That's a positioning one, and so it's more universally applicable. There's different avenues for control, I should say. So something like, let's say, Restless Prize, right? Before it got restricted, for a while there, people were describing it as an auto include, and some of that has to do with whatever warbands are prevalent in the meta or whatever objectives happen to be all over the meta. Restless Prize changes the objective state, so it's a control for the objective state. You can have a card like that, which is very much a control card when you're playing somebody who cares about objectives. Like if you are playing into the ghosts, or the Briar Queen, or anyone who any of these hold two ones. Often Dread Pageant care a lot about where the objectives are. That's a great control card in them. If you're going into somebody like Garrick's Reavers, it's not really controlling much at all against them. It may help you, but they by and large don't care whatsoever about it.
Yep.
So go ahead.
But by that point, so if you're bringing Restless Prize because you care about where objectives are, even to the smallest degree, even against a hard aggro matchup where they've knocked you off the objective, like that's what they've taken, being able to change an objective's position by 2 hexes is still control of the board. Sure. You're using it to your advantage, and whether that's not to take it out from under them, but to get back on one. And I think we think of that more in the objective play side, but that's still a major, disruption to, okay, I got you off the token. Mm-hmm. Even that counterplay of, that Garrick's Reavers player playing distraction and saying, okay, Otapodal is off the objective. And you go, mm-hmm. Well, I'll Restless Prize it back under him.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's certain matches where it's more disruptive to the opponent than it is helping to you. So you're correct. Like it's going to change the board state. You're controlling the state of the board by playing it. But for some, if we go back to that idea of disrupting your opponent's scoring and scoring by doing that, there's some where it's more of a control card than others, I think, is maybe what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like sure. If you're both of you are on 2 objectives and your opponent snags the third and you Restless Prize it out to score dominant position. Yeah, that's a pretty strong, sense of control there.
Yeah, exactly. There's like this recently we've seen the snares and nets. We saw Barbed Blade Net and Beastgrave, and then Extruded Snare and Soultooth Net drop. We've seen some of those effects from other cards before. Those are move and charge tokens. Matt, you've got at least one that meets that category in there, which I think is a great card, but I don't always see all that much.
Yeah.
How do you talk about that, and then talk about this applying move and charge tokens in the sense of control.
Absolutely. So, Energy Drain is the card that I picked, which picks a fighter that's on an objective, gives them a move token, and then every fighter within 2 hexes also takes a hunger token. Mm-hmm. But it's really, I think Energy Drain is one of the most balanced effects we've ever seen, mm-hmm. because most fighters have either moved or charged to get onto that objective token. Mm-hmm. And once they're on the token, they don't necessarily care about moving again. Mm-hmm. I remember playing a game where I was playing as Ripa, and first round I was longboarded, which to me is a major setup of control. Sure. I'm going to control this engagement by making sure you can't get to me. And in the first power step, Ripa was distracted onto an objective and energy drained.
Nice.
I've had almost that exact thing happen to me, and I remember just being shook. I think we were in a Ripa's mirror match even, or he used the distraction. I was like, I guess this makes this charge a little less comfortable, but whatever. Maybe I was like, I'll be next to a lethal instead of in a better spot, but who cares, about that distraction? I'll go ahead and put on Savage Visage or whatever I was putting on, and then he dropped the energy drain, and I was like, I'm gonna need a minute, because then not only had he prevented that charge, but he'd gotten me to spend even more resources wasted, at least in the short term, on that. So yeah, good pick. I think of that, if we talk about positioning control and objective control, these move and charge tokens, that's kind of fighter control. And so that's the kind of control that's stronger into warbands that are really relying on one particular fighter, or that are going to have a particular fighter. That this fighter is real important.
And if we go back to kind of the first, it may not be the first instance that came out, but it was the first one that was majorly played, was in the Nightfall season, Frozen in Time, which was a card that, if I'm remembering it correctly, you're rolling a die, and on a smash or a crit, you are the fighter can't be activated for the rest of the round. And that was, that pretty much blocked, most of your game at that point. And that was a massive change to how kind of your round was going to go. And it saw a lot of play because that was kind of right after Mollog was out, and Cursebreaker became a giant turret in most games. But it was that very harsh shutdown of an enemy fighter. And so, to look at the power, like I think we talk about power creep in Underworlds, and we've gone from that to Energy Drain, which is an elaborate card that, the fighter can still attack, and they have to have been on an objective.
Yeah. With the flip of not being 50-50, but that was, that's a good take. That's a good callback. I hadn't thought about Frozen in Time in a little while. Poor old Magor with everyone rushing around him.
Yeah.
Phil, you've got one from this era that's worthy of mentioning while we're talking about wild cards from season 1.
Well, I've got two, and they were.
Oh, you do.
They were both probably two of the most abusive control cards that have ever been printed in the game. So I guess one that can really mess you up is Quick Thinker. So for those who didn't play in Shadespire days and having to deal with these ridiculous cards, Quick Thinker was a reaction that let you make a move action after an enemy's move. So you do that during a charge. And I hated it every time it happened. Because effectively, it just meant that like your opponent got a free move, and you just positioned yourself into nothingness for no game whatsoever.
I remember playing against your Magors where you'd make a charge and just look at me and sigh and wait to see if I had it.
Here it comes.
I'd be like, no, I don't have it this time. And
I'll make an attack. Yeah. So that's one of those that that's where you get that hard control stuff where people just start to hate on control, because it's like, I can't even do charges because of this card. I mean, it's very strong. I don't know, now thinking back to it, it's control shouldn't no matter what, it shouldn't be denigrated just because you're playing the game. But it probably was too strong. Slick Rock is the new version of the same thing, and it's much more restricted. It feels a little bit better, but it can still mess you up. I like that.
Well, as an example, Quick Thinker got Forsaken, and Slick Rock just got restricted.
I mean, so as we said, the Forsaken and restricted list often includes control stuff, and especially passive control stuff.
I really wish Slick Rock would have been worded kind of as a after the attack action, and allowed the attack action and then or move, and then you're knocked off the objective. I think the negative player experience of canceling a charge is it was really my issue with it. I think that's a feel bad moment. Sure. But hey, you made the attack, but now you're knocked off. You don't get to be. You still won't score Bold Conquest off of it now.
That probably stays. Unrestricted if it's written like that. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm. So then it's basically just a distraction at that point, right?
Yeah, it's a spring-loaded distraction.
Yeah.
Right. One capable of disrupting surge level objectives, which distraction is not, or not in that moment. So we've talked about maybe fighter control and objective control, position control. There's a set, and I wasn't exactly sure how to describe these, but I think these is like sort of time locks. So this is like invisible walls, which is no longer in the game, but that was everyone's move was down to 2.
Something like that.
For the next activation, or insensate, which is there's several like these. Several different warbands have this, but this is the first friendly fighter to take damage in the next activation takes 1. I think most of the Khorne warbands. I think both the Khorne warbands have this. I think all the dwarf warbands have this. I think maybe even the sisters, the Coven.
I think they do.
So those are ones that basically say, hey, like this next activation is going to be not very good. I think there's the piercing stare or whatever that Grimnir has. You can say, hey, this guy's not going to attack or charge. So these ones that say next activation is going to be way suboptimal or kind of not happen at all. There's a handful of those, and those are interesting where they kind of fit in. Maybe they fit in kind of with the move charge token, the fighter control ones, but those are very timing oriented, I guess I'd say. Where played at the right time, they're crushing. Played at the wrong time, they're just kind of okay, I'll draw a power card.
Yeah, and I think that even just having your opponent draw a power card, given how few actions there are in the game, that can still be hugely beneficial.
Sure.
Another one that sort of fits in here is no time, which is one that I think we've talked about a number of times of how we'd always love to use it, but we just never can figure out where it goes. But like you say, these timing effects, they're on this range of slightly disruptive to absolutely game-breakingly powerful, where it's hey, I know you're going to try and play power cards here, no time, and it's the end of round 3, and your opponent just hangs their head because they know that they just lost the game.
Or things like blocking out reactions in the next one. Hey, I'm going to go in, and I need to make sure that Ripa doesn't narrow escape me. This attack is that important. I need to make sure there's no reactions that happen during this.
Right.
This feels like a category of almost power card control here. Matt, you got I'm glad you tagged this. I forgot. Well, go ahead.
On no time. What I wanted to say was, it was a card that it was one of those, the 11th Gambit kind of cards for me for a long time.
Sure.
And I had it in my deck leading up to the last Grand Clash I played in. And I was like, I don't know, this isn't necessarily doing much for me. And I almost took it out days before the event. Yeah. And then I said, you know what, I've practiced with this. I can't make changes. I'm overanalyzing.
Yeah.
And I remember one game I was playing into, it was either Thorns or Skeletons. And I had the last activation. And I had distraction and no time in my hand. So what I did was I distracted him before in the power step before that, made my charge hoping to knock somebody off a second objective, and then no timed. Yeah. Because he wasn't going to push back on before my charge.
Right. He wants to see what you're going to do first.
Yeah. And I found that was a very interesting spot to be in, where normally you'd be like, well, I want to distract in the last activation. And I realized that I had to rethink the way my hand was built. And I had to go, well, I can deny 2 objectives right now if I distract and at least push somebody off a second token.
Yeah. Talk to me. Here's another one that targets cards in a way that we've only relatively recently seen. I mean, they've been around a little bit, but Acidic Strike you put in. I'm glad you put in this list. I didn't think of it. So talk to me about that.
So Acidic Strike is a card that allows you to, on a successful attack, remove a targeted upgrade from an opponent. And whether or not that's an extra wound or a fairly heinous card, an accuracy boost. Really any attack that allows you to strip one of the power cards off of your opponent's fighter, which is super powerful because, there are so many cards, like Show of Force is finally restricted, but, you finally got those 3 upgrades on that fighter and one of them goes away. Or, in most of this season, imagine losing Deserved Confidence.
Right.
That can be a brutal tempo swing. And especially because it's targeted. There's cards like Narrowing Passage, which you pick the fighter as long as it's a quarry, and they get to randomly discard an upgrade, which I think you're mostly going to play if they have 1 upgrade, and strip that one off. But there's so many times where I think I wish he didn't have Cryptic Companion. Survival Instincts, Dominant Defender, Formidable Defense. There's so many, other control cards that you can take away just by kind of hitting once. And I think that's something. The Scattered Tome, it kind of absolutely bricks that Lost Pages build when you just say, well, I just denied you 4 glory, shooting you with a bad attack from Hadzu.
Yeah, and I think this is almost the by definition it's disruption, because there's not anything that it scores for you. Like, I cannot think of an objective that Acidic Strike. I think we mentioned this when we talked about it the first time. This is purely I'm just disrupting what my opponent is trying to do. Now, maybe get me a better board state or a better set of odds for my next attack or whatever, which will then score me other things. But it, in and of itself, isn't advancing your own objectives on its own, but it is very much disrupting what the opponent is doing.
Yeah.
Peeling that quarry card off of the guy who's going to score Absolute Stillness or something, like that. That's maybe. So that's kind of the spread. Does anyone have any other cards they want to talk about, or do we want to talk a little bit about? Are there maybe talk about the meta and what warbands we think are kind of iconic?
I got one more I got to mention.
Do it.
And it's because it's been played against me way too many times.
Okay.
And that card is Maddening Cackle. Which is the Thorns of the Briar Queen faction-specific ploy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that card states it's a reaction that you play after an enemy fighter's failed attack action, and you uninspire that fighter, and that fighter can no longer be inspired for the rest of the game.
Brutal.
The worst part about it, and I think I've played a lot of Rippas in my career. It also shares the same window as the Snarlfang.
It does.
So they not only uninspire you and say you can't be inspired, they also say you can't bite with the wolf, and shivers.
Yeah. Well, and what especially this is, it's controlling in and of itself, where it is targeting a fighter. It's bringing that fighter to an uninspired status. But once you know that's out there, it has like almost a blanket effect on the game, where you're like, all right, like I could make this nothing attack. I have an activation to burn. I've got Rippa sitting here. I've got a charge lined up that I know I'm going to be good for. I could just take this 2 Fury bow shot, maybe ping somebody off, or that. They're like, oh, actually, man, Maddening Cackle's out there. Like, nope, I'm drawing a power card. I'm not swinging unless I'm swinging with the boss Lapo with rerolls or whatever, because it's not worth it. And so it has that kind of disruptive effect, that control effect, beyond just the actual playing of that card. So that's a really great inclusion in the list, I think.
Well, and you were mentioning Quick Thinker and the effect that had on the game. I would say Upper Hand for the limited time that it was in the game, which was a ploy that allowed you to swing and attack your way. They kind of have a boogeyman effect on the game. Yeah. You're always sitting there going like, do they have it? Do they have it? Yeah. And that's a really interesting state to be in, where you're, a Ferocious Resistance, I would say, was that way in Dire Chasm.
Sure.
Does he have it in his hand? Can I make the kill before they get it out?
Right. That's a good example. Phil, you got anything else, or should we talk about warbands in the meta here?
Yeah, I think we can move to warbands. The only other thing I've been thinking about is there's discard tech in the game, and it is control, but I just don't think it's there yet. I don't think there's enough that it's worth talking about much, just because it's too random and there's not enough discard for it to really be disruptive.
Fair.
But if we ever get there, having to discard cards can be really, really damaging to a game plan. So I think it's one of those keep your eyes on this space sort of things.
Sure.
Yeah. One other thing we didn't mention, and I think I'd be remiss if we didn't, was just bonus defense dice, bonus wounds. You know, those kind of self-buffing. Like that's generally the type of control that I like to play. Is where I'm making you now choose. Choose the worst kind of fighter to go into. Well, I've got this. Probably the most control I've played in a long time has been Dread Pageant this season. And, you can come into this 2-dodge Glissette who gets a reroll on a defense dice, or who has, Prey Bond and is getting full supports as well. Or come attack Slake Slash.
Yeah.
Which one do you want to hit? I don't want you to hit Glissette because she's holding an objective.
Yeah.
But I really don't care if you hit the big cow at the front.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a similar thing, I think, I used to run Reavers with the one was legal, the Deathly Fortitude or Sudden Growth, where it was +2 wounds, -2 move. You go and you make your charge. And then you put that on, it would be saying like, now this guy's not killable in one shot. So now I've disrupted your ability to score glory back on a one shot here. And I'm going to make you use even more resources, be it cards or additional activations, to try and remove this and get glory again. So I think that maybe fits that same category.
And I guess damage reduction fits in the same place, which I guess is why damage reduction cards have always been, or lately have been getting restricted, because they're more punishing than bonus wounds, I guess, because it makes you have to spend that many more activations to get kills.
Yeah, it can be. Well, all right. Let's briefly talk about what makes a warband particularly suited to control play as a primary. Matt, if you were, what characteristics do you feel like are common in warbands that are particularly strong for control?
So I think a big thing would be the defense dice. I think warbands that are going to look at control are really going to focus on how strong they get while inspired or even uninspired, in something like Harrows, right? Can I defend against most attacks? And I think that's, we mentioned Steelhearts, who inspire to, one of the best, kind of standard defense characteristic of the game in 2-block. And that's a lot of dice at a lot of sides that are successes. So I think a big part of control is looking at, how defensive am I? Can I make sure that I'm not just getting constantly run over?
I would say another one would be Warband Size. I think tends to be the smaller warband size, the better you are potentially at control. If for no other reason than you're taking up less space on the board, so you have more options as to where you're going to be. So you have a better chance of controlling where the engagements happen. And also, talking about disrupting your opponent's glory scoring, if I only have 3 fighters and you have, 9, let's say, if you're Gits, we're starting with a potential 9 glory worth of kills on your side and 3 glory worth of kills on my side. So they're not universally so, but there's a tendency for those smaller warbands to maybe be better suited for control.
I think another thing to go along with some of the, just like, not necessarily the fighters, but like how a warband plays, if they have extra like weird tools in their toolbox, they can suddenly become a good control. So I mean, we mentioned having like less fighters or good defense. Well, eyes don't really have either of those things. I mean, I guess they're not huge, but they are definitely a control like play style of warband. And I think
Yeah.
almost all of that is hinging on the fact that they have a really weird fighter that takes at least 2 attacks or an attack and some extra tech to kill, and teleporting, which very few warbands have. I guess teleporting is something we didn't even really talk about because it only comes up in like there's a couple cards that teleport, but most of it's faction specific. But being able to just show up on the other side of the board can be very surprising.
On that same point, like Miari's with the Aether Quartz counter, I think 9 times out of 10, if not higher, those Aether Quartzes are used to re-roll a defense dice on something that's going to kill them. So they're generally played as a control factor. If not, like occasionally to re-roll a die to inspire themselves to get better defense, which once again like plays into that whole control style.
I'll make it even simpler as far as the card front, Phil. If you have an in-faction distraction, so if you have predatory growls or scratching in the shadows or whatever it is that gives you 1 extra, you're already 1 step ahead as far as your ability to control. So if you have multiples of these things, then you end up being those iconic control things. So yeah, exactly. Like Harrow. I mean, I'm talking about of all the categories that we've talked about. So Harrows is only 4 fighters. They've got good defense. They have multiple in-faction distractions. Steelhearts have very few fighters. They can get to very good defense, and they have an in-faction distraction. That's why these ones kind of pop up in the control conversation perhaps more frequently than others. But we're talking about some warbands from the past. What do we say? Let's talk about what we think of control in the current meta. And Matt, since you've done some foreshadowing on this already tonight, I'm going to toss it to you.
Yeah. So we share. I'll send you a deck list if you want, and I can share it in the show notes.
Yeah, please do.
But I've been playing Dread Pageant, mostly in a control style, since the Path to Glory Team League earlier this season. And what's been really interesting about that is it's gone in such a very different direction. Dread Pageant is a very strange 4-fighter warband. Other than Glissette, they're not really defensive at all. They don't really have a lot of wounds to talk about. However, they have an amazingly control card pool. You've got Shared Pain, which allows you to redirect an attack to a target you care much less about. You've got Distracting Ostentation, which reduces attack dice. You've got Sickening Resilience, where you can turn any attack into 1 damage. You've got Lure of Slanesh, which can be a push for the enemy or for yourself. And depending on how many wounded fighters you have on your side, it can be multiple hexes. So they have such an amazingly good card pool to play control. My favorite combo right now in this deck is I've always been really intrigued by Hunting Season, and especially with something like Eternal Chase is there too. So now we have kind of more of that effect available. I enjoyed playing Hunting Season early in the season and playing it with the Hunter Hunted, where you made a quarry kill a hunter. Which can be as easy as Slake Slash killing a Crypt Ghoul on the first charge and scoring a 2 Glory Surge off of it. And so I was playing the other night and got Prey Bond on Glissette, which states this fighter is a quarry, and if they're a quarry, they count as having extra supporting fighters on defense for each other surviving friendly quarry. And so you play Hunting Season, and all of a sudden Glissette defends on every side of the dice.
Nice.
Yeah.
That was that combo. What was it? In the past, it was like Survival Instincts on Inspired Ripa with Bonded and what was the Soul Bond? Was that it? But that took more cards to get there. But that's always a fun like, well, these are both successes. Just are either of them critical successes? Let's find out. So,
Yeah, exactly.
all right. Well, where? So you're talking about in a specific warband, Dread Pageant in the current meta. We'll pass that on. Do you feel like it's prevalent? Do you feel like it's a standalone type? Or we've talked about every warband is doing some control. How do you think it slots in, like in the broader spectrum of the full meta?
So I think the early part of Dire Chasm saw a lot of control, especially Crushes could be played kind of in an aggro style, but what I found was really becoming successful with them was this Crushes style where you kind of sat, you held a couple of objectives, and you worked stronger on your counter punch, and then scored cards like To the End or the Avatar Risen, where you're just trying to stack upgrades and survive. And then if somebody wants to run at you, they run at you, and you have a lot of damage on your side of the board, and multiple healing cards as well. So I think we had a large kind of shift towards control at the start of the season, and I think now I don't think there's any one warband that's doing it in a very pure style, like a hard control style. I think there aren't a lot of great objectives for it. There are some that you can splash in for support, but in general, it's really hard to build a full control deck where that's all you're doing.
And why do you think that is? Do you think it's because of speed being out there, or do you think it's more the matter of the objectives not being in there? Like you just don't have enough to kind of score on your own with, like purely working on disruption.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I would say maybe the only true control that we've seen kind of in the later half of the season is maybe how prevalent Feed the Beastgrave got. Because that was really, it was control specifically designed around one play style, but it was also for that aggro style. It was kill me or I'm going to flip all the tokens and score a five glory objective. So there was very little that opponents could do around it unless you're specifically teching into disrupting that one deck.
Yeah, and I think Feed the Beastgrave is a good example of like a control style that's more about like like having a game state where that you can score. It's just so hard to disrupt. So it's like you're just gonna do it, and your opponent likely didn't build for it, because to do so would probably mean that they had to give up a whole bunch of valuable space in their deck.
Sure.
And so, like, while disrupting your opponent's game plan is obviously important if you're trying to play control, having a very reliable game plan for yourself is then also equally important, because you're not going to score as much glory. And so I think something like Feed the Beastgrave ends up being super important, and that's why we see things like objective stacking tends to be popular in control, and we pretty much have lost all of our good well, I wouldn't say all, but like tomes, it's gone. That's just rotation. But I mean, they started to crack down on tomes. Lost pages are now still sort of around. Avatar is sort of gone. Not that you can't take it, but people just aren't using it as much. So yeah, I think there's something to be said there. I feel like maybe Soul Raid maybe. They're kind of fragile though. I think that's maybe the part that stops them. But they have a lot of objectives that are about positioning, and then they've got a lot of weird stuff they can do with the fish, and poisons to be disruptive.
I mean, that fish you can kind of guarantee what's going to happen with it in a way that you can't with other fighters. So I guess watch this space, see who the innovators are.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's a pretty good frame on that. Does anybody have any last thoughts they want to share? Anything we think we've missed?
I think I'm good.
Okay.
I like it.
Yeah, I think that was great. Well, let me have one last question here, because we made the definition of control fairly broad. We talked about all different ways you can control the board and the game state and such. Is there any thought what if someone told us that we were being too broad? Is that a fair criticism, or is it just that it's been poorly defined up until this point?
I think maybe it's like, if you're going to say that a deck is control, then you probably wouldn't want to include the full spectrum of control play. Because to define a deck as being control, you'd have to look at all the cards and say, like, well, is the main objective of the things in the deck to disrupt or guarantee things that are happening for you? And I think in a lot of cases, that's not actually going to be the case. If you look at someone's deck, they're not really building to just be control. Like, they're not just bringing all the distraction cards. Although maybe if you're Harrows. And I think that it's like we were just saying, I don't know that there's enough scoring that you can do with just that. But when there usually is enough for you to score just off of control cards, most of the time those playstyles get shut down because they become too passive. Because if you can win with just cards, you don't need the miniatures.
Sure.
Yeah.
And well, this is a card game, and I would argue that it's more a card game than a miniatures game. I think people want to see the miniatures be an active part. So maybe we never will have true, pure control play in the game for any sustained period of time.
Yeah, I it's going to depend on how you feel about whether something matches that definition. I think the advantage of defining it broadly is that it reminds everyone that you have control in your deck. You almost certainly have control in your deck in some way, and if you're not thinking about it in that way, you probably should be. Think about what control you're bringing to the game, and think about it in those terms.
I think, one of the most prevalent objective cards from this season, like in the objective play style, has been dominant position. And I would argue that dominant position is just as much a control card as it is an objective card. Because you're not just caring about you being on objectives, you're caring about how many your opponent controls. And that is, really that concept of interactive control. I don't just care about what I'm doing. I have to care about what my opponent's doing. And then I have to make sure I have the tools to disrupt it.
I love that. I love that so much that I think I'm going to call it there. That is Dire Chasm Control is dominant position. That's a good button for the episode. So, Matt, thanks a ton for coming on. If people want to check out your blog, we're going to have the link in the show notes. I think what I usually do is I type in Set the Tempo Underworlds blog in my search, and it comes up as a first hit. But is there any other place that you want people to find you or chat with you or get in touch if they want to?
Yeah, I'm active on the Facebook groups. You can find me on the Discords, Matt Set the Tempo. Comment on my blog, like, share. It's been a blast writing it. Everybody in the community has been super supportive and wonderful. So, thank all of you for reading it and enjoying what I'm putting out. And if you ever have any ideas, topics, feedback, let me know. I take that stuff super seriously, and I love to hear it.
Yeah, you do. It's one of those things I've noticed. You're kind of responsive with, when people are requesting something, you put in the effort and bring it out on the next few. Let's see. For us, if you want to get in touch with us, we're on Twitter at WTHcast. You can get us at whatthehexcast@gmail.com. Phil and I are both floating around the Discords. We have our own Discord, which you can hop on. It's a good one. There's a big narrative community on our own Discord where we talk there, but pretty broad. We try to be pretty open there. It's pretty fun. We always say thanks to the bigger Mortal Realms team. We're a part of that. We're a part of this network, and it's all kind of a team effort with all the different shows going. Coming up next for them, do you know what their next story phase? Oh, they're covering the Dominion. They're covering the Dominion novel. I'm actually on that episode.
I was going to say, I was like, I think you are reading that book.
I am. I'm actually listening to it. I picked it up on audio, so that's good. Yeah. For us, actually, the next couple coming at you, we'd like to do a little Soul Raid coverage. We're still working out some of the guest spots lineup for that, see if we can get that going. And then we are going to have a crossover with the story phase. We're going to cover the Dire Chasm short story compilation. Basically, kind of for anyone who's been wondering about some more of the background of Dire Chasm, we're going to do that. And I throw that at you. It's sort of a Mortal Realms Network crossover. Matt, you've actually got the recommended listening for us today. What do you got?
Yeah, recommended listening is In Control by Nemesia.
All right. I'm glad I might have said that Nemesis. So
I would have too.
Yeah. I checked it out. It was a real fun track. Are they Belgian? Is that they're European?
Yeah, I can't remember offhand.
All right, fair enough. That's going to do it for us. Thank you so much for listening. For What the Hex, I've been Davey.
This is Phil.
And this is Matt.
Like a pro.
I didn't change anything.
Oh, yeah. That's always how it goes. So don't change a thing, Phil. Perfect the way you are.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I generally agree with that.
Okay. Well, how about I'll try, and then you guys can tell me why it's wrong.
I'm definitely still going to try.
I thought you were going to say I'm definitely still going to tell you you're wrong.
Well, I guess I can do that too.